Welcome to my garage. I'm Kelly. You might know me as Desert Wench Kelly. I live out in the desert full-time up in Joshua Tree, California, and I pride myself on just going out and trying things and figuring them out and seeing what I like. And that is probably a good way to summarize how I've lived my life up until this point. Wow, filming long-form content is so much different from making a 1 to 2 minute long Instagram reel. Because there's so many different things I could talk about in this video, I ended up asking all of you what you wanted to hear more about. Apparently, people are very interested in my life story, so I guess we'll start there. I was born and raised in San Diego. I grew up kind of between San Diego and a little town called Blythe, California. I have spent a lot of time in Blythe. It is the last town in California in between San Diego and Phoenix, so right as you cross into the Arizona border. It's right on the Colorado River. I could probably make an entire video about Blythe, how special it is to me, how formative it's been in my entire life, how kind of divisive and an interesting place it is, but I digress. From a very early age, I would just kind of wake up and decide to do things. I would call this the Elle Woods mindset. You know, when she's talking about going to Harvard and she says, "What, like it's hard?" Case in point, when I was in high school, I was not a sporty girl, and I was terrified of speaking in public or really to anyone. And the two things that I had varsity letters in were softball and speech and debate. My high school didn't even have a speech and debate team. So for a little while, I was kind of a one-woman show. I ended up going to the Stanford National Forensics Institute. It's summer camp for dorks. I say that with so much love. And by the end of high school, I was in the top 50 in the US for House congressional debate. I had a lot of business casual for like a 17-year-old girl. From there, I went on to study political science at the University of San Diego. I had never camped before, and I decided that I was going to be an outdoor adventure guide. So I went through a program. I learned how to take people on hiking and backpacking and kayaking trips. I was also in a sorority, which always elicits quite the response from people because it is so antithetical to who I am today. Then it came time to get a job after college. A friend of mine and I, we decided we were just going to apply to 3 jobs, and if we got one of those jobs, great. And if we did not get one of those jobs, we were going to move to Mexico. I don't know what we were going to do in Mexico, but it was not have a job, probably. Well, we both ended up getting jobs. I moved up to the Bay Area and I started working in tech. I'm the first person in my family to have that kind of a corporate job, so it was new territory. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I went into work for years in an office with thousands of people, with multiple cafeterias and a wellness room, and we were circling back on the deliverables all the time. I lived in the Bay Area for a few years doing that, and then when COVID-19 happened, I moved home back to Southern California. Around that time was when my father passed away. If you've heard the story of how I got my Jeep before, that is how I came to have Quail, which is my 2016 Jeep Rubicon. She was my dad's, and I had the opportunity to sell her, let her sit, or wheel her harder than she had ever been wheeled before. You can guess which option I selected, but before I went on this incredible off-roading journey, I moved to New York City for a few years. And it was probably a form of escapism and dealing with grief, but it is a time that I really look back on fondly, and I learned a lot about myself, and I got to experience a totally different way of living, and I still love that city. But at a certain point, it was time for me to come home. And when I came back to California, I knew I wanted to live somewhere wild. My mom kept asking, "Why do you want to live in the middle of nowhere?" And I'm like, "Mom, do you see all of these pictures of me as a child, like fishing and riding motorcycles, being about the desert? That's what I want to do as an adult." So now I live in Joshua Tree, California, full-time. I always say full-time because when I moved up here, that was typically the first question that I was getting. But do you really live here? Or do you just live here on the weekends? I love it up here. It is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, but I probably say that about anywhere in the desert that I've ever been. And now, because I have a very limited definition of rest, I spend most of my free time off-roading, working on my cars, off-roading more, or training to be a guide and instructor for off-road. I really don't want to drone on and on in this video, so I guess I'll talk a little bit about the Samurai next. So as I have started to think about how I can be a very proficient off-road guide and instructor, again, two kind of similar but different paths, I know that vehicle mechanics has been a big area of opportunity for me. So I'm not a mechanic. I don't have really any formal mechanical training. But to be a really effective instructor, I want to be able to explain to people what their vehicle is doing as they're asking it to drive up a sand dune, ford a river or a stream. And that requires me to go on my own mechanical journey in the first place. So why the Suzuki Samurai? It all goes back to Blythe. I thought that the coolest person in town was this guy, and it will be very funny if he ever sees this, probably not, I don't know. I thought the coolest person in town was this guy who worked at AutoZone, and he drove a Suzuki Samurai. I think it was a similar color, or maybe it was red. I don't exactly remember. And I would always see him driving in town, and it was open top. It'd be 110 degrees in the summer, and he's just like happily driving this car around. I just thought it was the cutest car I'd ever seen. I had a bit of a geo-tracker phase there as well, but the Samurai really has my heart. Fast forward to trying to be very intentional with my mechanical journey, and the other area of opportunity that I know that I have is manual transmissions. I learned to drive on an automatic. It was a Jeep, of course. Earlier this year, I had the privilege of joining Barlow Adventures in Moab for some train the trainer training, if you will. That was the first time I really drove a manual transmission, and it was up Poison Spider, up and down Poison Spider, and a stock Jeep Wrangler Sport manual. So much fun. I only screamed a couple of times. It was such a different feel trying to go slow and rock crawl and work my lines and work the clutch at the same time, but it was really fun, and I knew that I needed to work more seriously on my manual transmission skills. So a few months later, I'm driving up near Blythe, up Highway 95, and I see this car on the side of the road. Well, actually, okay, let me correct myself. My mom sees this car on the side of the road. I was looking out the other side of the window, and she says, "Oh, we just passed your car." I said, "Okay, turn around." We turned around, we see this beauty on the side of the highway with a big for sale sign. And I tried to not get too excited. I tried to not get too ahead of myself. I had no idea what condition it was in. I didn't really know where I would start. And I had never bought a car like that before, literally from the side of the road. But I texted the number. I spoke with Jim. Lovely man, lovely family. It was very funny. Going to the test drive, my boyfriend was like, "Okay, you're gonna drive it, we'll walk away, we'll do some negotiations." I drove it for about 10 minutes, and they said, "Okay, what do you think?" And I just said, "I'll take it." Original engine, original transmission. Most of it is pretty stock. It has an e-locker in the rear axle. It is lifted, it's on 31-inch tires. Not the original wheels. Some other small things have been done to it. It's carbureted. You can kind of see that there's an aftermarket carburetor on here as well. But the good news is I have the original carburetor in a garbage bag from the last owner. So I bought this car on the side of the road. I made a little reel about it and put that on the internet, and I guess people were very interested in it. Ever since then, I've been working on the car. A couple weeks ago, she decided she needed a little break, so I've been troubleshooting things that have been wrong with it. There is so much deferred maintenance on this car. It has a huge oil leak in it. 2 of the tires are flat. There's 2 different kinds of tires on the car, and they're all bald. But we love her, and she is so cute. Eventually, I'd like to make the Samurai more of a rock crawler. I'm very inspired by Amber Slauson and her King of the Hammers run in her Suzuki Samurai. I mean, I will say that I am very lucky that my interest in this specific car has perfectly matched up with the kind of car that's easy to work on. There's a lot of aftermarket support for, and there's a lot of documentation on how to fix it. So Samurais have a pretty big cult following, and that's been really, really helpful as I've started to undertake all of the maintenance and improvements that I need to catch up on. I'm trying to think of what else is relevant to the life story question. I've spent some time working as a commercial model as well, between San Diego, LA, and New York. Had a couple of agencies. I've really enjoyed it. A big reason why I throttled back on the modeling was actually an unfortunate poison oak incident in which I had huge, horrible scars and burns on most of my body. I can confidently say that that put me out of the running for a lot of modeling jobs at the time, and by the time my skin cleared up and I was recovered, I was on to other things. I'll still take modeling jobs every now and then. I'm lucky in that I get to be a little bit more selective, but I love working on creative projects. I've spent a lot of time photographing the desert. I started doing photography when I was in high school as one of those kind of like Tumblr sad girl hobbies. And I would go to estate sales and buy old cameras that were broken and try to kind of Frankenstein them back together, bring them back to life. That's probably where my love of old machines comes from. Okay, but how did you get into off-roading? This is kind of a long and complicated story, so buckle up. Haha. So if you'll remember, my dad died. I also have very dark humor about this, and that's thanks to a lot of therapy. When my dad passed away, he had recently bought a Jeep Rubicon. That is Quail. That's my 2016 Jeep. I love her so very much. But I needed to learn how to use it. And that was a big challenge for me as someone who is a little bit more by the book, and I actually love learning things. I like to read the manual for the things that I own. I started by reading the manual for the car and for the winch that came on the car. But that wasn't enough for me because you don't learn to swim by reading a book about swimming. So I Googled, naturally, off-road training, or I think it was off-road driver training, California, Arizona. It was something like that. And the first thing that popped up was Barlow Adventures, and thank God it did. This is where the story gets a little bit more complicated. I signed up for the soonest training that was available. It was in Glamis. Glamis is also known as the Imperial Sand Dunes. It's the largest sand dune complex in North America. It is the most otherworldly, terrifying place you've ever seen. It's like being on a different planet. And so I, having no formal off-roading experience at all, not knowing a single person who was going to be at this multi-day camping kind of training thing, signed up, took the time off, and I drove out to Glamis. And when I arrived, I realized that the driver training that I had signed up for was actually part of competition training for some off-road rally. Later that year, I would end up competing in that rally in another series of events. That is the Rebelle Rally. It is the longest off-road rally in the US. It's basically 8 days of map and compass navigation over like 2,500 kilometers. You don't have a phone, you don't have GPS, you literally just have a map and compass. I digress. How did I get into off-roading? That same year, my employer ended up putting out an opportunity for employees to compete in what was that exact rally, in the Rebelle Rally. So I basically applied and joined an 8-month training program to see if I would successfully get to compete in one of those seats. And I ended up making it. So we were team 196 Evergreen Edge, myself and my partner Rachel. I was the driver, she was the navigator, although we both trained in each seat, which is very important. Fast forward, after months of competition, the rally is over. And if you've ever worked really hard toward a specific measurable goal and then achieved that goal, the other side of that goal can feel very confusing. And so I knew I wanted to do more off-roading. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. And at that point, I went back to Barlow Adventures and I said, I want to do more of this and I want to be more. I don't want to just be someone who drives around. I want to help others also learn how to do this themselves. And since then, a lot of the different off-road activities that I've done has been with that kind of teaching aspect in mind of what are important skills for me to know so that I can then teach them and welcome more people into off-roading and to motorsport in general. Which is kind of hard to break into, especially given that there's typically a pretty high barrier for entry, which is having some kind of vehicle that you're okay taking off of the pavement. I could say more, but who doesn't love a little mystery? I'm thinking of doing some more long-form videos of me working on the car, of me out doing my feral Sunday videos. Every week I get out and I have myself a very feral day off-road, finding new trails, pushing my driving skills. So I'll be documenting things like that, and let me know what you want to hear more about.